Hi, my fourth grade reading friends. Today we are going to be reading a book, and it is called Add a Twist, Scientist. And the reason that I'm so excited to share this book with you is because it's a book that I wish I had when I was a fourth grader. Because if I'm being honest with you, I used to think that I wasn't a scientist. And even now, whenever we talk about topics in school like reading and writing and math, science still makes me nervous because sometimes I feel like I'm not very good at it. Does anybody else ever feel that way? I see, yeah, some other people feel that way too. But this book, when I read it, it reminds me that I actually am a scientist and I have great science ideas and I am always thinking like a scientist, even though I don't even realize it. So that is one of the reasons that I love this book so much and I'm so excited to share it with you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. I am reading this book today on Sora. And remember how many awesome books Sora has. And remember that that is a resource that you can be using to read at home. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we are going to get started in just a second. But before we do, I want you to take a second and I want you to think and I want you to picture, how do you picture a scientist? So something I like to do because I've gotten ready for our read aloud today, I have my supplies with me that I like to have. And one thing that I would like to do when I answer this question about how I picture scientists, I might draw a scientist on my paper and write some things about what I think a scientist is. So go ahead and pause the video and take a second to do that. And now that we are ready to read our book, I have it pulled up and I just want you to see the cover real quick. Let me get that ready for you. There is the cover, but I do have one more thing that I want us to think about before we go ahead and get started on our read aloud today, and that is this here. So I want you to think about this. What do these words have to do with science? You can ignore this top part because this is going to be your seesaw lesson also. So that's great to get us thinking about it now. So these are all words that are going to come up in our book today. I am going to read them to you and I'm going to underline them. See my underliner? I'm going to underline them while I read them to you. And while I do that, I want you to think about, I'm actually going to underline them as I read them. I want you to think about what those words might have to do with science. So here's our first one. Research. What does research have to do with science? Experiments. What does that have to do with science? Hypothesis. Who's heard that word before? It's hard to say. Say it with me. Hypothesis. Who's heard that word before? What does that have to do with science? Chaos. What does that word have to do with science? Puzzle. Havoc. And last but not least, questions. So take a second and think about those words, maybe write down some ideas. What do those have to do with science? Remember, these are all words that we're going to see in our read aloud today. So if you see them, something I like to do when I see words that I know are coming, maybe underline them on your screen, just with like the back of your pen, and think about what that word has to do with science, because we are going to be coming back to this. And now we are going to get back to delete all these marks so that they are not on my screen anymore. And then we are going to go to our read aloud. Perfect. Here we go. We've got it all loaded up. So here is Add a Twist, Scientist. It is written by Andrea Beatty and illustrated by David Roberts. I really like this page because it has graph paper. Who's used graph paper before? I think that's cool because it's something that scientists use a lot. Remember, look for those words. Ada Marie, said not one word till the day she turned 3. She bounced in her crib and looked all around, observing the world, but not making a sound. She learned how to climb and make her big break with a trail of chaos left in her wake. Did anyone else notice? I'm underlining it with my screen. Did anybody else notice that? That was one of our words. We saw it right there. We saw the word chaos right there. Chaos. With a trail of chaos left in her wake. This looks really chaotic down here. She ran through the day, chasing each sound in sight, and didn't slow down till she conked out at night. So I'm wondering if we have any notices or wonders on this page. Does anybody have any notices or wonders on this page? I'm noticing that the words are rhyming. Has anybody else noticed that the words are rhyming? Let's keep going. Her parents were frazzled, but tried not to freak, as Ada grew bigger and still did not speak. Clearly, young Ada, with lots in her head, would have something to say when it ought to be said. That's just what happened when Ada turned 3. She tore through the house on a fact-finding spree and climbed up the clock just as high as she could. Her parents yelled, "Stop!" as all good parents would. Ada's chin quivered, but she did not cry. She took a deep breath and simply asked, "Why? Why does it tick and why does it talk? Why don't we call it a granddaughter clock? Why are there pointy things stuck into a rose? Why are there hairs up inside of your nose?" She started with why, and then what, how, and when. By bedtime, she came back to why once again. She drifted to sleep as her dazed parents smiled at the curious thoughts of their curious child, who wanted to know what the world was about. They kissed her and whispered, "You'll figure it out." So something I'm noticing about Ada that's really important to know is that she is always asking questions about the world around us. And whenever I talked about earlier feeling sometimes like I wasn't a scientist, but then I realized that I do think like a scientist, this is what I was thinking about. I'm always thinking about the world around us. Is that something that you do too? Yeah. See, we are all scientists thinking about the world around us, just like Ada. What? Why? How? When? Why? Her parents kept up with their high-flying kid, whose questions and chaos both grew as she did. There's our word chaos again. So what does that word have to do with science now that we're reading the book? Even Miss Greer found her hands were quite full when young Ada's chaos wreaked havoc at school. So there's another one of our words, havoc. So we have chaos and havoc at school. So chaos and havoc are words that go together sometimes. They're both whenever things are really crazy and out of control. So what do those words have to do with science? But this much was clear about Miss Ada Twist. She had all the traits of a great scientist. Even Ada was busy that first day of spring, testing the sounds that make mockingbirds sing, when a horrible stench whacked her right in the nose, a pungent aroma that curled her toes. "Zowie," said Ada, which got her to thinking, what is the source of that terrible stinking? How does a nose know there's something to smell? And does it stink if there's no nose to tell? She rattled off questions. Oh, that's another one of our words. Questions. So what does questions have to do with being a scientist? Think about that while we finish this page. She rattled off questions and tapped on her chin. She'd start at the start is where she ought to begin. A mystery, a riddle, a puzzle. There's another word, a puzzle. I bet you noticed it too. A puzzle, a quest. This was the moment that Ada loved best. So take take a second and think, what are these words having to do with science that we're seeing so far? Ada did research to learn all she could of smelling and smells. Oh, did you catch it? There's another one of our words, research. She did research to learn all that she could of smelling and smells, both the stinky and the good. One hypothesis, did you catch it? Hypothesis. One hypothesis. So a hypothesis is like a scientific guess. One hypothesis, Ada thought, could be true. The terrible stink came from Dad's cabbage stew. She tested and tested, but soon Ada knew it was time to come up with hypothesis 2. So sometimes that's what scientists do. They come up with one hypothesis, and then they realize that their hypothesis isn't right, so they have to come up with another hypothesis, another scientific guess about their question. Then, zowie, that stink struck again, just like that. Hypothesis 2, it's caused by the cat. The cat couldn't make such a stink on its own. It needed perfume and some fancy cologne. So young Ada tested. This test was a flop. She started again, but her parents yelled, "Stop!" Ada Marie, to the thinking chair, now. By the time we count 3. Enough, said her mother. That's it, said her dad. Her parents were frustrated, frazzled, and mad. Why? Ada questioned. Her mother said, no. What? Ada queried. Her father said, go. You've ruined our supper. You've made You've ruined our supper. You've made the cat stink. Enough with your questions. Now sit there and think. She looked at her parents. Her heart turned to goo. Poor Ada Twist didn't know what to do. She sat all alone by herself in the hall, and Ada once more could say nothing at all. And so Ada sat, and she sat, and she sat, and she thought about science and Stu and the cat, and how her experiments, there's another word, experiments. So all of these things that Ada was doing with the cat and with the stew were experiments. Usually we think about experiments being in a lab or something, but here Ada's doing experiments in her own home. And how her experiments made such a big mess. Does it have to be so? Is that part of success? Are messes a problem? And while she was thinking, what was the source of that terrible stinking? Ada did what scientists do. She asked a small question, and then she asked 2. There's our word again. And each of those questions led her to 3 questions more. As Ada got thinking, she really dug in. She scribbled her questions and tapped on her chin. She started at why, and then what, how, and when. At the end of the hall, she reached why once again. So Ada's asking questions and questions and questions and questions, and that's what makes her a scientist in my mind. Do you ask questions in your head or out loud? That makes you a scientist too. Her parents calmed down and they came back to talk. They looked at the hallway and just had to gawk. No patch of bare paint could be seen on the wall. The thinking chair now was the great thinking hall. Would anyone else's parents be mad if they did all that on the wall? They watched their young daughter and sighed as they did. What would they do with this curious kid who wanted to know what the world was about? They smiled and whispered, we'll figure it out. And that's what they did, because that's what you do when your kid has a passion and a heart that is true. They remade their world, and now they're all in the act of helping young Ada sort fiction from fact. She asked lots of questions. How could she resist? It's all in the heart of a young scientist. And as for that smell, do you remember that smell? What can Ada Twist do but learn all she can with her friends in grade 2? Will they discover that stink in the curl in the that will they discover the stink that curls toes? Well, that is a question. And someday, who knows? All right. So something that I love about this book also is that we still don't know at the end, we still don't know what causes that stink that Ada keeps thinking about. But that's also part of being a scientist. Sometimes we don't get all the answers, and that's okay. But the reason I wanted to read this book is because we are all going to be scientists in 4th grade. For me and Mrs. Lowenberg and Mrs. Holt, it's really important that we are all scientists and we all put on our science brains and ask lots and lots of questions. We also need to explore our questions, but sometimes be okay with not always knowing all the answers to our questions. So I'm going to share my screen one more time again with you. And I want to go back to these words that I showed you before we read the book. So this is going to be your Seesaw assignment. And I want you to use the microphone button on Seesaw. And I want you to talk about some of these words that we read in the book and think about what they have to do with science. And you can share that with us on Seesaw. We will be excited to hear what you think one or more of these words has to do with science. So great job today, readers. That was a really great book, and it got me so excited for all of the awesome science that we're going to be doing in 4th grade. Yay for 4th grade! Bye, readers.